The influence of Islamic scholarship on the European Renaissance. It's difficult to realize it with the way that much of the Western world views the Islamic world these days, but at one time Islam was at the center of culture, science, and civilization. From about the 8th to the 13th century, the young Islamic world experienced a period of great scientific, cultural, and economic flourishing. The great centers of civilization and learning at the time were cities like Baghdad, Cairo, Damascus, Basra, and even Cordoba in Spain. Here's a map of the Islamic world during this period, and note that it included much of modern-day Spain and Portugal. During this time, there were significant advances in mathematics. Algebra, for instance. Algebra is an Arabic word, and much of this took place particularly in Persia. And among the renowned mathematicians from the period were Omar Khayyam, whose name you may know. Ibn al-Haytham made significant advances in what would later be known as calculus, centuries before either Isaac Newton or Gottfried Leibniz were even born. Advances were made in a whole range of scientific areas, including in the scientific method itself and the process of experimentation. There were advances in astronomy, physics, chemistry, medicine. The list is long. At around the same time, Europe was in something of, well, shall we say, a slump, following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. The period from the 5th to the 10th century, and some may say even up until the 15th century, used to be known as the Dark Ages, but I think that term's gone out of fashion somewhat. Now, although it's no doubt been somewhat exaggerated, this was a time of political, intellectual, and cultural decline, in Western Europe at least. Of particular importance in the Islamic world during this golden age was the work of philosophers such as Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, and Ibn Rushd, known in the West as Averroes. They were particularly important as interpreters of the philosophy of Aristotle, as well as other Greek philosophers. They first of all translated many of these works into Arabic, but they also wrote extensive commentaries on them, and these works of the Greek philosophers were kept alive and built upon in many centres of education across the Islamic world. In the meantime, much of this knowledge was lost to Western Europe and viewed with some suspicion as being of pagan origin. In the 12th century, these ideas, including the scientific advances I've mentioned, these Greek philosophical ideas, as well as original Islamic philosophy, began to make their way into Western Europe through contact along the eastern border regions, as well as, most significantly, through Islamic Spain. The influence of this on the subsequent development of Europe, first during the Renaissance and subsequently during the Enlightenment, was enormous. I wonder if there would even have been a Renaissance without this Islamic influence, and via that, the very important influence of Greek philosophy. It's difficult to imagine someone like Thomas Aquinas, who was so deeply indebted to Aristotelian philosophy and is regarded as one of the Catholic Church's greatest theologians and philosophers. It's hard to imagine him without the influence of this Islamic golden age. In the West, we naturally have a tendency to interpret world history through a particular lens, and that's perfectly understandable. History is never objective. However, given the way that much of the Western world today views much of the Islamic world today, it's occasionally worth remembering that we in the West owe an enormous debt to Islam during this period of its golden age, this period of its flourishing, when it preserved so much that was lost to Western Europe and made very significant advances in science, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy, while Western Europe was floundering.